All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Tuesday, November 8th, and we are at the beginning of week 3. You have submitted your week 2 assignments on Sunday, and hopefully have taken the chance to download your brand new assignment for week 3. We have 3 games this month. Everything kind of culminates in our third project, which will be utilizing exclusively orchestral and acoustic instrumentation and be in the style of an open world fantasy game where we have an environment where you can interact with your music in a very particular way. And we'll talk about vertical arrangement of your music so that you have layers of different instruments that can be brought in and out of the mix and stay in sync with a constantly changing soundtrack. So we will get into the new assignments for week 3, but we will also take a chance to listen to the submissions from week 2. So let me get the names up here. There we go. So we have a total of 13 different submissions. We'll take a listen to each one of them. And we have our ambient cues set up over here in our first column. We have the action cues in the second column, and the stingers set up in our third column here. And we'll talk a bit about how the music is going to operate in the game. Drag these over here. And what we are paying attention to overall with the soundtrack, how it's going to transition and change between ambient and action, and talk about the role that the stingers play in everything. So let's see. Other items on our plate. You've also done your first round of revisions. Since you have turned in your week 2 assignments, that gave you a chance to revise any submissions from week 1. So we will kind of stay on that pattern through the rest of the month. By the end of week 2 now, or sorry, by the end of week 3, now you'll have a chance to submit all of your week 2 assignments and do the same thing in week 4. You'll have a chance to submit any week 3 revisions. So this gives you a chance to improve the projects overall, improve the grade. I do like to point out that I will be grading the new week 2 submissions first before I go back and grade the week 1 revisions. That keeps everything on schedule so that you get the revisions notes back for the new assignments as soon as possible. And then while you are working on those revisions later on in the week, I will be going back to the week 1 revisions and updating any submissions and any grades. So look out for that. Sometimes it throws people off when they start seeing week 2 grades come in before the week 1 grades are completely finalized. So everything will be processed and kind of kept on schedule so that everybody gets their revision notes back as soon as possible through the week. So I hope to be getting through everything by all the new week 2 submissions by the end of tomorrow. If not, then by Thursday, everything will be back for your week 2 round of revisions coming up. So that's generally where we are at with the month. We'll start out here talking about your Angry Bots compositions, and then we will get into the new week 3 assignment called Palace of Renthalion. Let me know if you have any questions as we go along here. But I like to start out with an overview of how the different sets of cues are going to work. You see we have different columns here full of everybody's submissions. And we'll talk about how ambient and action and the stinger files all work together to create the soundtrack. We'll take a look at everybody's individual wave files to see if there's anything that we can identify visually, and then we'll take a listen to them. So the main thing we are focused on in this soundtrack is the overall approach and difference between your ambient and action cues. Each game has a unique approach to the music and how it's played back, not only the composition and the style and the instrumentation, but how the music functions in the game. Last week, the driving factors of 2D platformer were an intro, a main loop, and an ending. And this game would not rely or kind of be served well with a music system that relies on just a couple of main loops transitioning and randomizing back and forth. This game is going to have periods where you are wandering around the level and not doing much of anything, and other sections of intense action while you are battling the robots. And the battles are pretty quick, so it's going to be a lot of transitioning back and forth between the lower intensity ambient cues and the higher intensity action cues. I hope you have taken the chance to put your music actually working in the game, created a video capture of your music functioning, and listened to it critically as you went around the level and paid attention to how the music transitioned and changed as you progressed deeper and deeper into the game. So your ambient cue. The ambient cue is going to be heard most often. If nothing else is going on in the game, you are hearing the ambient cue. The game starts with the ambient cue and kind of always returns back to it at the end of each bit of action. So the ambient cue is going to be quite present throughout the gameplay, and it needs to be a bit invisible and kind of in the background, but ever changing and developing. So I referred to the term of musical sound design, using synths and effects processors and all sorts of kind of sound design techniques to create interesting textures that kind of develop and change over this minute-long loop. The file does need to loop. It needs to be, again, pretty invisible when it does loop and when it returns back to the front. And then one of the main things that we're listening for overall is the transition between ambient and action. However big and loud the ambient cue is, the action cue just needs to be bigger and louder and stronger than that. There can and probably should be some rhythm and power and maybe some low end bass that maybe creates a groove or some sort of rhythm that foreshadows the action that's coming along in the later cues. So overall, these cues look like they're pretty well set up to go. They're not completely loud, and you don't want a kind of reverse dynamic effect between your ambient cue and your action cues. You typically want the ambient cue to be a lower waveform or low in volume and power. Sometimes we'll hear something that has a lot of low-end bass, and then it transfers over to the action cues, which has fast percussion but is missing a lot of the power overall. You have to watch out if there's any gaps at the end of the files that will prevent the cues from looping. And we really can't pick it up visually from the waveforms, but you certainly want some change over the time of the cue. It shouldn't just be one solid pad or drone that doesn't much shift or go anywhere. Then the change to the action cues. The action cues need to be the loudest and strongest and most powerful instrumentation. Sometimes I hear stuff that's a little bit too laid back, and it sounds like you want to. You're not being chased around and threatened by the robots. It's kind of too laid back and easy. So you want that power and kind of pushing the rhythm, and with strong changes from one cue to the next. Each robot or each cue should be have its own instrumentation and melodic voice or melody or rhythm or some indication of the robot that's coming to attack you. So it mixes in a little bit with the gameplay. You can hear and identify the enemy that's coming around the corner. So they shouldn't really be too similar to each other. There should be some really solid identifying factors from one cue to the next. Again, you want solid loops. You probably should maintain similar tempo or maybe work with double time and half time of certain rhythmic elements to create a shift in the overall pace of the music. And your stingers... The stingers are a little bit harder to explain overall, but they are there to help with a bit of randomization, because every time you hit one of these action cues, every time you run into a spider, you're going to hear the same spider action cue. It provides a little bit of randomization and variation in each time that action cue is played. It needs to be a strong impact, a strong... hit at the front, a similar volume. It should not fade in overall, but it should quickly fade to silence and get out of the way. It really shouldn't get cut off at the end, or you also want to avoid rhythmically or melodically or tonally clashing against the music. So watch the overall shape of the waveforms. The first and the third one look pretty good here. The second one gets cut off. All of these look more like phrases as opposed to hits and impacts. Need to fade to silence. These generally have a pretty good shape. The last two look too small, low in volume. This one looks a bit better overall. These are going to get cut off at the end. These are fine, but probably don't need all of the extra... I don't know, unless there's reverb and decay in there. Could very well be. You want to make sure they all hit silence. You want to make sure that anything that's too low in volume is going to get lost in the mix. These could probably be, they're the right shape, but probably could even have a stronger impact. Those do reach silence. You want to watch anything that fades in. Those look pretty good. Those look like more like loops or something. And these should work pretty well with a strong impact at the front. So, at least visually, that is some of the things that we will be listening for. If you have any questions as we go along, if we're talking about your particular composition and want to discuss any aspect of it, comments on anybody else's, let me know. Let's see. I'm going to need this. See if I can do that. And make sure I can hear it. All right. Let's take a listen to an ambient cue. I like the big synths. It really has a kind of a dense feel overall. Probably by now would like to hear more of a change, either in instrumentation or more additional instruments, changing up the pattern. Basically, you've established the instrumentation and the sound in the beginning, and compositionally it's moved around, but there hasn't been much change otherwise. So I would just say more added instruments and more changes from the beginning to the end. Alright, loops pretty well. Let's check the action cues. Alright, these are probably kind of too laid back and groovy. If you want to not too intimidated by the robots. Faster drums overall. Much stronger instrumentation. And the first half and the second half sound very similar. Oop, what happened? So just work on the intensity, the pace of the music. 3 stairs. Mostly kind of sound like sound effects. The third one kind of works. Maybe adding more instrumentation. I mean, maybe adding a bit of reverb. Adding. They kind of get. They're kind of short and get cut off. Maybe using some instrumentation from here. Maybe a cymbal crash or a bass drop in there. They're also kind of, dry, so a bit of reverb overall. So I'd say the main thing would be to work on the pace of the action cues, because they kind of feel like they're at the same overall vibe of the ambient cue. There's not a big intensity difference between the two. All right. Let's check out the next one here. Alright, I like there's a little bit of rhythm in there. Sets an overall pace to the game. A melodic line. So, harmonically, melodically works well. A good progression set up there. Melodic lead line that changes over the cue. I would say just work on kind of the soundscape around the harmony and melody with some elements that kind of maybe bounce along with the rhythm. Either a delayed element or some big pad that fills kind of the outer edges of the mix. Something that isn't in this the beginning or the end. Like your instrumentation is established in the beginning and maintains all the way through. So introduce some things that only exist in certain parts of the cue. 3 action cues. The lead line just kind of repeats around and around, and against the really kind of harmonic melody line in the ambient cue is really quite dissonant through the action, and the rhythm seems very similar in each one. Could definitely create more of a change, especially in the mech cue. Also try using more powerful percussion. Again, the pace is kind of set in the background, but really doesn't change much from one cue to the next. Even the lead sound is similar, and while this lead is much more harmonious overall, these are quite dissonant. Let's do 3 stingers. So watch out for the rhythm. The rhythm might clash when it is played against the buzzer or mech or spider action cues. Not necessarily probably the same tempo, but you're not guaranteed that in the game they're going to start exactly at the same frame or same millisecond. So you want to make sure that you avoid, they just turn into sharp impacts. You just take away the rhythmic elements of it, hit hard like the front of these, and tail out into delay or reverb or some sort of effect. So I'd say, again, the rhythm and the power of the instrumentation and the action, and getting more difference between the ambient and action cues would be the focus in that submission. All right, we'll try the next one here. All right, let's do this. I like the size of the instrumentation, the openness of the pad, and the drums sound quite large. Cool, some change. Loop here. Cool. So the pad loops nicely in the background. Solid instrumentation change. There's a little bit of percussion in there. Hopefully kind of foreshadows what's coming up here. Just looking at the action cues, the spider cue looks a bit bigger, or the waveform looks a little bit bigger, maybe more powerful instrumentation. So let's do the action cues. Alright, so for percussion and the lead lines, it sounds like there's some missing elements between the drums and the melody. You got a strong percussion changes in each cue, you got a strong lead line, but it feels like it's missing bass, and it feels like it is missing probably more harmonic instrumentation, something like this pad that you had over here. This feels much more dense between, let's see, I don't know that there's bass. If there is bass, it's not really well defined in there, or it's a part of some of the other instrumentation, but it fills kind of the spectrum up a bit more than these. Also, the lead line dominates the mix in each one of these cues, so I would think that compositionally, the direction that you're headed with the rhythm and the melody works, but you need to support it with more harmonic instrumentation and probably a really strong bass line. Just, yeah, watch the level of the melody against the percussion in each one of those cues. Let's do these. 3 stingers. Cool. Stinger 1 and 3 work quite well. Could even probably get more volume and power, maybe a bit of compression and limiting, and pushing it a bit more through those stingers. Whatever the arpeggiated synth in Stinger 2 sounds a bit louder than the rest of whatever's going on in there. So you can even see the shape kind of in there. I would balance those a bit more, give those a bit more strength so that they can compete with whatever's going on over here. Whoa, I think you have all of the levels. I think you have all of the ideas together. Just adding in a couple of more instrument layers to fill in some of the gaps will work. All right, good stuff so far. Let's check out our next one here. That snare coming in, I keep waiting for a beat to come in. I would say that aesthetically, I would probably move way more from traditional instrumentation. It almost feels like a pop arrangement versus more of the kind of a textural soundscape necessary for a video game track. Like it calls a bit too much attention to itself, which is good in compositional production, so pop production, but as for kind of a underscore or backing feel to it, and I think it comes from the key pattern on the Rhodes. The pizzicatos kind of create that pattern. So if you could move more towards textural synths and more sound design effects, it would be very cool if you could throw some of this instrumentation through reverbs and distortions and filters and reverse it and do all sorts of interesting effects. You could probably just take what you have and do a sound design session on it to get some of those tones out of it. Let's see where it goes here. Again, the pattern's too laid back. With the snare on that 2 and 4. The drums feel very compressed, very limited against the rest of the instrumentation. So if you had just kind of like a double time snare in there, just on the instead of sitting back on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. You have solid changes, and again, you could use these elements in another revised pass of it, but I think that you really working on the pacing of the percussion will give it more of an action center. And the stingers here, these are probably not going to compete or be heard against the percussion in the action cues. Maybe the first one here. Okay, I'd say the third one has the most possibility. It does kind of feel like their sound effects utilize more of the instrumentation that you used from the action and the ambient and incorporate those into the stingers. This first one, the bass is probably not going to be heard against all of the bass in the action cues. So just watch out for the frequency ranges and the volume of the cues, or the stingers. All right. Another ambient cue here. Bass in there. Let's check the loop here. Okay, that loop works. I really like this middle section with the kind of distorted bass. I think maybe some of this low end in the beginning and the end might get lost in the mix. And it is kind of dominated by the electric keys in there also. The rhythm that you have a nice groove going on through the middle here that you could extend through the whole cue and kind of work against that bass sound and add in some other layers that come in and out against the keys. Kind of extend that melodic line that you have there. And a lot of that stuff kind of disappears in the beginning, the end, and the beginning again. So maybe extend that section out. 3 action cues. Alright, I would say work on the power of the percussion in each one of these. The beginning and the first half and the second half of each one of these cues are quite similar to each other. So work on more development through the first half and second half of each one of those cues. The low bass of especially this third one kind of interrupts the kick and snare. Well, yeah, there's a kick and close to a kick and snare in there, but more of a kind of work on the power of the pace of the pattern through the action cues, so that it really kind of pushes the overall intensity forward. And then between the ambient and all 4 of these action cues, I would work on the quantization. Quantize some of your melodic lines there against the percussion. Quantize the percussion against the grid and the rhythm. Make sure that everything is as tight as possible, and then you can speed things up and make things really short and staccato, and help the overall feeling of pace and intensity through the cues. think the sounds that you have and that you're using will work as long as the overall composition and production is tightened up. Stingers. Yeah, watch for the phrases, the little rhythmic patterns that you have in there. Again, just hit once, and then with lots of percussion, lots of instrumentation, then kind of decay and maybe distortion and reverb and decay and filters and all sorts of interesting effects to get it out to silence. All right. Doing well here. Let's try the next one. An ambient loop. Right, got kick, snare, and drone. Open hi-hat sound. Percussion changes. Maybe you could have changes in the pattern or more instrumentation in the higher range. You've got a melodic line going on there. Loops nicely. No big arguments here. No big criticisms or anything like that. I would say maybe have some instrumentation that only appears in certain elements. You got solid instrumentation that's established all the way through. You do kind of change it. Let's see. I mean, if I start in the beginning here, if I'm over here, there's kind of that sustained, distorted lead line. That's introduced some other percussion elements, but solid overall, and the action cues. I like the overall pace and intensity of the instrumentation. The spider cue has the strongest change overall, so I would probably work on making the mech action cue more different than the buzzer cue. Work on bigger drums, maybe change the pacing of some of the instrumentation. I like the lead lines and the development of the lead lines, but I would have more difference between buzzer and mech, and could probably keep buzzer the way it is and just have more variation to the mech cue. Good stuff so far. Three stingers. Cool. Those work. Really sharp impacts at the front. Maybe you could have a little bit more reverb, more decay, especially this first one. I think this one works pretty well. It's got a little delay tail on there. This one's got some bounce to it at the end. So, but yeah, that's basically what the stingers are there to do. As long as those can be heard against the mech cue, the action cues, overall should work very well. Nice work. Let's go check out our ambient cue here. Looks like the right channel has something different than the left channel. We also want to make sure that whatever happens at the end here loops nicely back to the beginning of the ambient cue. All right. There is some really good panning in here. Really good percussion. It does seem like there is something just sitting over in the right channel that could be a bit better balanced between the two channels. Maybe there's even like some compression or limiting happening on one channel than the other. It really feels kind of balanced heavily to the right. But what is going on in there definitely works. Compositionally, rhythmically, got the strings happening against all the fast percussion. Loop even works. Kind of just comes back just in time to loop back around. So just check if it's an intended effect overall, I'd say the main thing is the dynamic range difference. And even just the heavier right pan to the right side. But for the game overall and as the ambient cue, it should work nicely. These actually don't sound as powerful as the ambient cue. There's missing some instrumentation that really helped push the ambient cue. Yeah, the mech and spider especially seem very sparse compared. So I would work on the intensity of the action cues. Maybe go away a bit from that main core drum loop that is used through all the cues, or just add in stronger percussion on top of that. Make more variation and difference in the instrumentation. I mean, there is some difference in there, but the percussion really makes it sound quite similar. So I'd say just work on the mix for the ambient cue and work on more of the power of the action cues. Big, small, small. So more than cymbal crash. Kick, stronger impact. You shouldn't have everything fade in. They sound too similar. Just take another pass at the stingers overall. All right. There we go. Another ambient cue. Okay, got some cool tones in there. Interesting stuff happening in the background. Now about halfway through, should have some changes. Probably have something in the bass also, kind of something in the lower ranges. You have that lead line got the weird stuff happening in the background. Could always use more of that. Again, have some instrumentation that doesn't exist everywhere, just exists in either the beginning, the middle, or the end. Have different elements come in and out. So it's a good start overall. Let's check the loop. Yeah, you gotta watch out for some of that delayed stuff. It gets cut off. You kind of hear everything start all over again at the beginning. So watch the loop there. Cool. Solid power from the percussion. Halftime feel through the mech cue. I'd say first half and second half. Second half needs more change. Cool. Yep, same thing in all three of them. Just create more variation through the second half of each one of the cues. But each one of them has their own unique identity that will work for each robot. All right, the good thing is they definitely will be heard against the other ones because the sweep and a higher kind of register overall could probably still have a strong kick, low-end bass in there to help provide some of the power. The third one kind of feels like a synth note. It could probably work, though, against a stronger impact overall. So, some good elements, probably maintaining what you have there and just building off of it. All right. Next. Cool. I like the pace of the percussion and the lead line. The lead line is probably a little bit loud. Could probably come back against the percussion and the rest of the instrumentation a bit more. But with a faster pace here, you have to make sure that the action cues match up to that. Could probably have some changes happen to that lead line also. Gating effects, stutter, distortion at different times could introduce, or filters also, could introduce some different character. A lot of good movement in there. So I'd probably, again, introduce some other instrumentation and changes, maybe even changes to the percussion, because, again, you establish what's going on here in the beginning part, and other than the composition, the rest of the mix doesn't change. So I definitely like the movement in the melody, the lead line, the rhythmic parts kind of work well with it. Let's check the loop here. Alright, yeah, definitely watch, there's probably a gap or something at the end there. Yeah, watch that little space at the end. Create a seamless loop as that goes around. Action cues. Alright, you're going to need stronger percussion through here. Kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare, kick, snare. and stronger variations in the percussion, in the instrumentation. Just more difference from one to the next, so you know which robot's coming for you. That can be done with a different lead instrument, different percussion for each cue. Yeah, watch the loop of each cue. You want to make sure that there's no gaps. Let's just see here. Yep, all these little tiny bits of silence will create hiccups as that loops and transitions around. And 3 stingers. Each one of them kind of gets cut off at the end. Watch out for the actual melodic phrases. They feel like, little phrases, little themes. So those might clash against the other ones and probably won't be heard against the activity going on in the action cues. So stronger impacts and hits for those stinger cues. All right, what did I say? 13. Very good. Let's keep going here. All right, again, the main thing to make these work properly in the game is making sure you don't have the tails here. It's probably no, it's probably this, include audio tail. If you have that checked, when you bounce, it'll add in a little bit of extra beyond whatever your in and out points or start and end points are. So you always want to leave that off as you bounce. Loop files. Ambient. So the main thing I would say is to change it up once you have things established. You have the progression established, the instrumentation, the little melodic kind of blips, synth, the top there. More variation, changes in the instrumentation, changes in the rhythm, just more development through the cue once you have things established. Also watch out for this kind of filter sweep fade in from the synths at the beginning. That sweep right there, every single time you're finished with the action cue and it transitions back to the ambient, it's going to start at the beginning of the ambient cue and start with that fade in. So you'll probably end up hearing that more often than you would like. So it's best to start somewhere with a little bit less, a little bit more invisible, a little less obvious point. Then we'll go over to the action cues. Alright, each one of these, there's an interesting synth on the top, but the rhythm and the percussion and all the rest of the synths seems to be identical from one to the next, and same here. Right, same drums, so definitely need more change from one to the next, more change between ambient and action cues. I like the some of the synths and what they're doing on top will work against more variation in the rest of the instrumentation. Work on the looping, work on the difference and variation from one cue to the next. And stingers. So these could work as elements. That one needs to be maybe a little bit more intimidating than that. But these could work as elements along with the strong kick and reverb and hit and crash cymbal and percussion and strong impact at the front and utilize these elements also. So some good bass elements to work with, but definitely need more changes through each cue. All right, ambient. Feels very mono. Why is it only coming out of one channel here? Stereo output. Well, if it's equally balanced like this, you want a little bit more separation in the instrumentation. You have a pattern set up in a progression, but again, you could probably have more difference in that instead of repeating the pattern over through the entire cue, changing the instrumentation, add in instruments that only show up in certain parts of the cue, work on the overall development of the ambient, the action cues. All right, feels like a 2-bar loop going around. Some change from one to the next. I'm going to guess that the pattern stays the same through each one of the cues. So more development over each of the 8-bar cues, more instrumentation also. Really feels like drums and a bass. So less repetition through the action cues in each one of those. Those kind of sound like synth notes. This could work as an element, but watch out for just a couple of MIDI notes. More power, more impact, definitely use from percussion through those cues. And ambient cue. I like the pattern, solid instrumentation. Got the rhythm, you got the progression, you got a little bit of melody happening. Yeah, we just have more changes in the lead instrumentation. You got some little synths and effects that come in. Just could definitely have more of that stuff. happening at different points in the cue. Could even have some changes to the percussion. Percussion feels pretty consistent all the way through. So could have just a bit of variation there, but overall works nicely. Something happened to this last one? This only feels like it's 4 bars. Check. Check. Let's see here. No. Maybe that... We'll see what happens. So they are all 8 bars. They're just at different tempos. I would watch out for different tempos against the strong percussion of the ambient cue as it switches and changes. It's going to create some strong differences. Is the ambient cue and the mech the same? Well, I'll have to check whatever the tempos are. But I'd have to hear it in the context of the game. Typically, I hesitate against switching tempos. What you have done in each one of them definitely works. Again, there could be probably more variation in the first 4 bars versus the second 4 bars of each one of these. But you definitely got the power and the variation of the instrumentation working in each one of those cues. These look like phrases. These look like maybe loops or something. They need to only be just a couple of seconds long. I think it says 1 to 3 seconds. And they actually sound like the different action cues. And they're going to be randomly chosen to play with each one of them, so they might clash. Especially the tempo differences between them. If they're combined against something that's at an opposite tempo or like a triplet feel or something, it'll cause all sorts of rhythmic clashing. So work on just a solid impact that doesn't work against the tempo. All right, so good ideas there. Mostly it's tightening up the production and probably just the constant tempo in each one of them. And our last one here don't have an ambient cue, so I'm going to jump over to the action cues here. Alright, so you got a strong groove going. Could use more like melodic instrumentation, something that changes from one cue to the next. Mech could probably use stronger percussion. Like, interesting, cool sounds. Percussion always helps the power. So solid instrumentation changes. Each one of them sounds unique. Yeah. This should all work. Work as stingers with a stronger hit at the front and a fade to silence. So overall, we had some good examples, good things to check out and listen to. Hopefully you saw a variety of different approaches, and you saw some ideas that might help your own composition. We saw mainly the things we were paying attention to were the differences between the ambient and action cue. The differences between each of the robots is that there was something unique about each one of them so that you could hear them coming. Balances of the power of the instrumentation, the different instrument ranges, whether things existed in the lower registers or in a higher, more melodic register. What else? Pacing and intensity differences, so that the ambient was less than the power of the action. We didn't want anything that was too laid back and groovy and chill. We wanted a much more intense and in-your-face kind of overall approach. Yes, I think that's a lot of what I had to say about that. If you have any questions as you either checked out the archive or you get your feedback and you want to discuss any aspect, we can certainly do that. So let me save and get this out of the way. And we will switch into our new Week 3 assignment, a discussion of our new composition here. Let me get a few things loaded up on my side. New game this week. Everything kind of, as I mentioned before, I believe, everything kind of culminates here in Week 3. We only have 3 games this month. Not only, that's certainly enough overall to create the music and sound effects for 3 game projects. But we don't start any brand new game project in Week 4 because we don't have a Week 5 for peer review and revisions. So we have our final brand new game starting here in Week 3, and then we use Week 4 to finish it out, revise it. You will also be doing a final game capture of your each one of your games that you post up in a discussion post and share with the rest of the class, so we can see kind of the final version of what everybody did. So, new game requires new type of music and a new overall approach to how the music operates in the game. Well, I thought I had a video here. Let me try this again. How about... I'm going to need that. And downloads the movie. There we go. Thought that was somewhere. All right, so this is Palace of Renthalion. You get the game itself, Mac game, when you download the assignment. You also get the video here that gives an indication of what things are going to look like. And you get the PDF. That is a description of all of the aspects of the game itself and the gameplay. So, this game, actually, you know what? I'm going to load up the game itself so I can roam around just a little bit. Play. This game is made by Garage Tech Games. It is available in the Unity Asset Store. It really isn't a fully fleshed out game. It is more of a game level or an environment for us to showcase our music. And so this is the Palace of Renthalion. That typically becomes more of a mouthful as I say it over and over again, so I end up calling this the Palace game. But it's very indicative of the type of project that you would get along the timeline of development. Something you would get during development that isn't the full complete game yet, but they would say, hey, we've got our level created here. A lot of different action is going on, going to happen at this part of the game. There's no characters yet. There's no storyline or anything, but they need you to create certain parts of the music for the soundtrack of this area. So you can't actually kind of just wander off in any one direction, and you might find the end of the map and fall off the edge of the world. So there is an ending, but there's not much else going on except for this very cool looking game environment. So it's pretty straightforward to control and play, but it has a very specific setup for your music. So when you enter the palace, you'll see there are 4 different doorways, one labeled Earth, Wind, Fire, and Water, and those represent 4 different parts of the story, the storyline of the game. 4 different. They also represent 4 different music cues or 4 different wave files that will be playing during this gameplay. So the player has the chance of walking out any one of these 4 doorways, and you'll see there's a text prompt that pops up there that says press E to engage, and you can turn on and off the piece of music that represents that particular part of the game or that doorway. So I can turn on the music here. Okay, the music probably will not play, but that's all right. I will have an example here in just a bit. And the player can turn on that piece of music. They can hit E on their keyboard again and turn it back off. And you also see the torches light up here to give you some visual indication. So a particular piece of music can play, and the player can walk out of any one of these 4 doorways and turn on a new piece of music, and that piece of music has to play back in sync along with all of the other pieces of music. Let's see if I can actually set this up so you can hear it. Alright, not the video, the game itself. Now, I don't know how much audio control I have over this, so I'm going to talk a bit and turn on each of these pieces of music here. So if I walk out of this doorway and I hit E, should be able to hear that piece of music, and if I hit E again, it fades out. If I hit E again, it fades in over 3 seconds. And then the player can wander off to any other location. And turn on a new piece of music. And one by one, the player can turn on and off any one of these 4 pieces of music. So we have a question here in the chat. Zachary, so it's like 4 different stems that are part of the same song. Absolutely. So here's actually what's going on in the background. We have 4 files. They all are the same length, so they start at the same time and they end at the same time. That means that they're all going to loop together, and they're going to stay in sync. So when the game starts, all 4 of them start at the same time, and when you walk out any one of these doorways, it is going to fade up that particular piece of music. And it fades it back to negative infinity. So when you press E, it takes 3 seconds and it fades up to unity. And you press E again and it fades back to negative infinity. So yes, they are 4 stems that basically make up one whole song. So by the time you reach all 4 of these, when they're playing, you reveal the full composition. And then the player has the ability to turn on and off any of these different cues at any time, and they always stay in sync and they always make sense because you compose them. They need to have a common chord progression. They need to be in the same key. They need to be at the same tempo, same time signature. They start and end at the same time so that they loop together, and they have all of these common elements that make sense as they get played at the same time. So you will have to create a composition made up of different instrument layers where all 4 of them can be played back in any combination. At any time you can have 1 or 2 or 3 or all 4 of them play at the same time. So it is best if you focus on the composition first and then work with the overall instrumentation. So let's talk about the different thematic ideas of the different cues. Let me do this. Let me just go from logic here. So the earth cue here, right here. The earth cue represents the hero and the hero's journey. It represents typically the start of the adventure. Often, if you the type of game this mimics is typically a fantasy game in the style of a Legend of Zelda, or more modern, you have the Skyrim series, or Dragon's Age, or maybe a World of Warcraft, or any one of those many popular different versions of games out there. And so at the beginning of the journey, the hero is probably very heroic and adventurous and positive. I often imagine that this cue is played by a group of musicians that might actually be modeled and animated into the game. So it's just a small group of musicians playing handheld instruments. You're not going to go for the full orchestra at this part, no ensembles, solo instrumentation at this point, so individual woodwinds, flutes and oboes, clarinets, strings. You would probably, instead of going for a string ensemble, you would more likely go for an individual fiddle or viola. You could go for plucked strings, lutes and harps work, small handheld instrumentation, shakers and cymbals and tambourines, bongos, things like that will work for the ambient cue. The wind cue represents the enemy and the danger out there, a little bit of evil and foreboding. It's not the action, it is not the battle at this point. Often you see the enemy and you might want to sneak around them. You might want to try to avoid the enemy, so there could be an element of stealth in here. So stealth and danger and tension, a little bit of danger and foreboding of what could come up. So you might have a little bit of element of stealth trying to avoid the enemy at this point. Instrumentation works in the lower registers, low cellos and brass, bass drums could work well. More of the pulse, and maybe a little bit, I've heard flutes and harps, really small strained instrumentation in a higher register to balance the lower instruments. The fire cue. The fire is the battle itself. The fire is the action cue, basically. This is where you're going to throw the full orchestra at it. You're going to have full string sections, strong brass parts, timpanis, snares, swelling and crashing cymbals, strong, powerful instrumentation from the fire cue. This is going to be about percussion and the strength of the instrumentation. The earth is going to be more melodic and thinner instrumentation. The wind has more instrumentation in the lower registers and a little bit of uneasiness in there. And then the water cue. The water cue represents the emotional ups and downs and twists and turns in the game. So this is kind of where you're pulling at the heartstrings of the player. Emotional, you have two different directions. You could go everything in a positive, major, kind of upward, motivating or uplifting direction. That's the word I'm going for. It could be everything positive. It could represent love and safety and family, and you won and you saved the town and you defeated the dragon, and so it's everything positive and up and right with the world. Or you could go in a negative direction, a more minor tonality overall. So it represents death and loss and longing and suffering and sadness and all that is negative in the world. So any one of those emotional directions you want to go, up or down, you can work against typically a strong emotional line, string line. I've heard harps and harpsichords work, choirs work well to fit in with the more emotional theme. And the main thing is here is that when brought all together, they still make sense. Nothing should really stick out too far in the mix, overpower any other elements. You should be able to focus on different aspects of the mix, and it all still makes sense. And you want to make sure all the game is going to do is go down from negative infinity up to unity. And so you need to make sure that when these faders sit at unity, that is the perfect mix. So when this fader sits at unity, it is the overall level that you want, so that it doesn't completely override or distort the master. So make sure you're bouncing these four files so that it doesn't completely overdrive the output when played together at unity. I have another example here. Start out with the earth cue. So, a strong lead line, lots of power from the brass and the earth cue. Here's the wind. The earth cue is a little bit too big of the instrumentation overall, but the wind cue here has a bit of tension, has a little pulse in the lower registers overall, has the little plucks in the glockenspiel at the higher ranges to kind of offset that. fire cue has lots of big brass and power. Lots of percussion, lots of strength from the instrumentation. And then the water cue has the kind of thinner lead melodic string line. And again, if I bring it all in together, now it does get quite dense when you typically are going to have 3 or 4 instrument layers per cue. So by the time you mix them all together, you're pushing 12 or 16 or 20 tracks all together. So when you are creating and composing this kind of project, when you're working on this, having some sort of plan and direction to head will help out so that you don't get kind of lost in all of the notes in the composition. So the biggest thing that can cause trouble in this composition is the notes themselves. Separate from the instrumentation, separate from the production, the mixing, the automation, looping, or anything like that are the notes, is the actual composition. The composition can clash. You can have different pitches clash against each other. You can have different rhythmic tempos and patterns clash against each other. So having common elements that work across the composition will help all of these parts work together, all of the instruments work together, where you don't run out of ideas or combinations. Because if you start building up instrument by instrument, say you start by writing a flute line, and then you add a cello part to that, and then you add an oboe, then you add a violin, then you add trumpet and trombone and French horn. With each new instrument that you add, you have to make sure it works with all of the previous instrument lines that you wrote. And without thought on your key and your progression, those can very easily clash. You can basically compose yourself into a corner, paint yourself into a corner where you run out of different combinations. You either start repeating yourself or things start clashing. There's only so many notes in the scale and only so many ways that you can rhythmically subdivide a beat. And things can start getting cluttered and clash and cause all sorts of havoc. So the way that I would suggest that you approach this composition is do not go upwards, do not go from the bottom up, adding instrument by instrument, but instead take the approach of what's commonly known as a top-down composition, where you worry about the overall notes in the composition first, and then you focus on the actual instrumentation, orchestration, the arrangement of the music, and build from there. So let me show you. I got a session here that I need to load up, which might take a moment for Contact to load up all of the parts. Let's see here. So before you really start on your composition, there is a orchestral template that we'll take a look at that will help you build your tracks in a way that makes a bit of sense. So let me set up a few things here. All right. So I have my my orchestral session set up here to create a composition similar to your assignment. And you will be building a template that has a solid number of solid number of instruments in it, and articulations that allows you to work on something like this. So when you have a lot of different instruments together, the combination of them can get kind of confusing as you try to organize things together. So don't worry about the instrumentation. Instead, first work on the composition itself. I've mentioned so far that there's going to be a lot of similar elements between these four wave files. They're all going to be in the same key. They're all going to be at the same tempo. They're all going to be in the same time signature, and they're going to follow a common chord progression. So you start out by choosing your key and your tempo and your time signature. I am in 85 beats per minute. I'm in 6/8, and I don't know what key I'm in. I think I'm in a C minor of some description. Don't worry about this. It's not reading my notes yet. We have the basic common elements that are going to work across all of my instruments, all of my layers. Then I've set up a 16 bar loop here and just build everything straight up and down. You're going to start with an orchestral template that will give you access to a lot of these instruments, but you're probably going to need to add a piano to start your composition. I recommend that you start with the actual notes. Don't worry about individual instruments yet. So choose one kind of blank slate instrument that allows you to just get the composition out. And a piano is very, very good for this because it has a range, lots of octaves, a big range overall. And we can play it and create kind of the basic structure, the basic voicings of our chords and direction of our melody. So, start with the chord progression first. You know that all four of these wave files are going to follow a common chord progression. That chord progression needs to be in a key, in a tempo, in a time signature. Figure out that basic skeleton of your composition here. So here is my chord progression written out on the piano. You're going to create a series of 3 or 4 voice chords, which will provide the basic structure of your composition. You know everything is going to have to work against that. All 4 of these are the same tempo, same time signature, start and end at the same time, 16 bars. So you know that each one of them is going to have the chord progression. It's also going to have a melody. That melody needs to work across that or against that chord progression, and it needs to be in a key. And then you're going to eventually have 4 different melodies, one for each one of the cues, and those 4 melodies need to work together. So here is still on the piano the melody for the earth cue. Now this is eventually going to be another instrument, and I just write it out against the chord progression, very simple at this time, to make sure it all works together. Of a kind of a change in the second half, goes towards more of a major tonality. If I listen to the water cue, here's my melody here. Here's my fire cue. And if I bring in my earth cue against it, in the wind cue. I can bring all 4 of these in, and they should all make sense. So, I have the basics of my melodies. I have 3 and 4 voices in my chord progression. I have a large portion of my composition. I can use my chords and start building out my harmonic lines with different instruments. So I can start thinking about different groups of instruments that I want to work for my progression and work for my melody. So I choose a lead melodic instrument that's going to represent earth, wind, fire, and water. I choose other harmonic lines that work against the chords that I've built. I have, now, I'm not going to be as lucky. I mean, you can try it, but you can take all of your first voice of each of your chords and put that to a cello and see if that kind of works. It's probably not going to work, and you're going to need to create more movement overall. Each cue doesn't need all 3 and 4 voices of each chord, so you don't need first, third, and fifth voice and root position in all 4 of these cues, or else it's going to build and create probably not a very interesting progression. But through a combination of intervals and inversions and different through octaves and moving notes into the right register and range, you can probably start building lines against the chord progression with your brass and strings and woodwinds and pick out some of the melodic instruments overall. So here again is my chord progression and the earth melody. And that melody ended up being a piccolo. The chord progression went to the nylon guitar, I think. Flute also. Fiddle. Percussion. So I have the basics of my progression, I have my melodic lines, and then I just start working on the orchestration, figuring out groups of instruments that will work against the kind of theme that I'm going for. So smaller handheld instrumentation through the earth cue. I'll bring back my chord progression, take out my earth instrumentation, and go to the wind melody here. The wind melody turned into bassoon and oboe. Take out the piano. Take out the piano. Pizzicatos came in for the harmonies, along with the trumpet, tuba. Harp and some strings. So harp and pizzicato turns into the harmony, bass, bassoon and oboe turn into the melodic lines, tuba holds up the bass. You don't need percussion in every cue, but you need something in the lows, the mids, and the highs to kind of balance out and make sure that each cue has enough instrumentation on its own. So here's the fire cue. And the brass, the violins did a lot of the arpeggios. Which was a harmony. And the trumpets and the brass turns into the melodic lines. Then percussion. So you can still hear the original progression, and you can still hear the new melodic lines from the pianos. Wind. No, water, actually. So with the water cue, I basically just took the piano and moved it over to the harpsichord. I think I might have took that pretty directly with a little bit of massaging. Violin, I think, becomes the melody. Pizzicato cellos and basses. Choir comes in. Violin kind of backs up the flute. So think about groups of instruments and how they can work for your mix and for your overall orchestration. Certain things you want to avoid. Don't repeat exact performances in multiple cues. You can reuse instruments in cues, especially if you use a different articulation. Like if you use a cello sustain in one cue, you can easily get away with a pizzicato cello in another cue. But don't take the exact same MIDI line and copy it to another cue. Don't take the exact same instrument, copy it over. Don't repeat things. Sometimes I'll hear drums in all four, like the exact same drum part in all four cues, and then you play all four of them together and it quadruples the sound of everything. So watch out for the overall, first focus on the composition, write it out on a piano part, and then start orchestrating it across different cues. Notice here that I've also created like these blank fire guide tracks, wind guide tracks. These are just blank regions. Also put a blank track in between to organize it a bit better. Color-coded my tracks because this can get really confusing really fast if there's not some sort of thought and organization put into it ahead of time. And then quickly I want to point out the template that you'll also be working on. I would suggest that you work on the orchestral template first before you work on the composition. You might work on the piano part and work on the basics there, but we definitely get this template set up to give you very quick access to instrumentation. One of the main things when we started this composition, one of the first things that we heard were people were not using the best source of instruments that they had access to. Mainly that was they were using EXS-24 instruments when they had access to the Contact orchestral library. Nowadays, the East-West Composers Cloud is available, and a lot of people have jumped on that and gotten access to a lot of better instrumentation overall. But this template will give you an opportunity to set up your instruments in a logical way with different articulations and get them up and loaded quickly so that you can compose. So to give you an idea of what's going on here, there are a total of 56 tracks. 56 tracks are really 14 different instruments with 4 different articulations each. So you have piccolos, flutes, oboes, clarinets, bassoons, and contrabassoons. Those are all of your woodwinds. You've got French horns, trumpets, trombones, and tubas. those are all of your brass, and you've got your violins, violas, cellos, and double bass. Those are your strings. I don't include percussion because a lot of sessions get very unique with percussion, different setups overall, and plus you get into like one preset or patch is just snares and one's just timpanis, and so plus 56 tracks gives you a pretty solid start overall. Here in the chat, Zachary, been thinking of getting a trying Composer's Cloud. It's definitely worth a try overall. For $30 a month, you get access to a lot of, I think might even be cheaper than that for students, but you get access to a lot of great sounds. You should probably like either have a whole lot of space on your hard drive or buy a brand new hard drive when you sign up for it, because it does take up a lot of space. Yeah, $15 for students, but only 7 libraries. But you can constantly, it's only 7 libraries at a time, so you can constantly change them out to determine which of the 7 that you really like, right? So Hollywood Strings, Hollywood Brass, that is completely awesome for what it is. And if you can afford it, then eventually actually buying the libraries, which is a better idea in the long run than the $30 forever. But that just even for test driving things to figure out what you do want to purchase overall, it's a great deal. But yeah, hard drive space is key because people get it and then they realize how insanely large these the sample libraries are. Okay, so for this template, you'll be using Contact instruments in the Contact library. So really, once you set it up once or do it a couple times, it's really the same thing that flows through all of the different instruments. Some of them have different articulations overall, but it's the same sort of flow. So I'm going to redo these piccolos here to give you an idea of what's happening. Delete 4 of these articulations, and I'm going to create new software instrument tracks. And instead of creating 4 tracks, I'm going to create 1 track with 4 multi-timbral parts. I'm going to show you what the difference and what the heck that means anyway. So when I create 1 track with 4 multi-timbral parts, notice that these are all set to instrument 1, but go to channel 1, 2, 3, and 4. So when I do that, I can go and add my Contact instrument, and those 4 tracks will go to the same instance of Contact. So notice that any one of these that I click on, it all has the same Contact on it. But if I go to track 1 here, it's set to MIDI channel 1. If I go to track 2, it's set to MIDI channel 2, 3, and 4. So I can route multiple different MIDI channels into the same instance of Contact. Let me show you how that is different, right? If I do this normally, when I create this, I would actually do like 4 tracks, software instrument tracks. I create that. Notice here that they aren't the same instrument. Instrument 1, 15, 16, and 17. These would actually be 4 different instances of Contact. If I load up here, this goes to Contact. This one doesn't. This one would be different. They're all actually set to MIDI channel all, so that they can go to any one of them. But this is not what you want to do. You don't want to set up individual instruments, individual instances of Contact. I want all 4 of those tracks to go to the same instance of Contact, so I do 1 track with 4 multi-timbral parts. I don't think that's the clearest thing in the world in Logic. I don't think it's the most logical thing that Logic's ever done, but that's how you get multiple channels into the same instrument. So let me do that again. Let me go to Native Instruments, go to Contact, go to Stereo. Now I have channel 1, 2, 3, and 4 with Contact here. I've got Contact loaded up, and I am going to load up 4 instances of this piccolo. And when I do this, piccolo, 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 piccolo. And the reason I do this is so I can have quick access to my different articulations. Piccolo, sustain, piccolo, forte, piano. Now there is a PDF, a workflow PDF that goes through step by step how to set all of this up. And again, once you set it up and go through the process a couple of times, it really becomes the same thing to get everything set up. Staccato. So you have 4 different instruments here. We'll even do this. Come down here and say this one is sustain. This one is going to be the one for forte piano. Forte piano starts out stronger, lightens up after that. Sforzando is kind of the opposite. Starts out lighter and strengthens. Sforzando. And the last one is staccato. And to make sure that the right thing goes to the right place, we want to make sure that this is MIDI channel 1 and it's set to sustain. We want to check that this is MIDI channel 2 and it's set to forte piano. This one is MIDI channel 3. MIDI channel 3 and it's set to sforzando. And this one is MIDI channel 4 and it's set to staccato. And the cool thing about this is even though that I have 4 instances or 4 piccolo instruments loaded up, notice that each one of these takes 17.7 megabytes, but the total here is still 17.77. So it doesn't actually quadruple my space. It reuses the same instruments, same samples over and over again. Look at that. I just am drawing here. Notice I name it piccolo sustain here, but when I jump in, it doesn't. Oh, there it goes. Bug. Weird. Okay, so even though I use multiple instances overall, it doesn't reuse, or it does reuse the samples. It doesn't add on to the overall file size. So by doing this, and I have my keyboard set up here, now all I do is arm a particular track. See if I can fit all of this on the screen here. Arm sustain, and I get instant access to sustain. If I access forte piano here, if I access sforzando, whichever one I arm, I get instant access to that channel. So more than likely you're going to be using sustain and staccato quite a bit, and so it gives you very quick access to those. The other cool thing is you can actually layer them and play multiples at the same time. So you can actually get a layered effect, or you could get like a sustain and staccato. You can still do quick runs overall, but when you stop, it has the sustain. So all sorts of fun things. A lot of times folks will ask, well, you got the key switches down here. Why don't you use key switching? And key switching is is perfectly acceptable, is very much a lot of the ways that people work with these samples. But I'm not much of a fan of key switching, number one, because I'm not very good at doing it live, like a lot of folks. You have to chase key switches, which means that if you switch from sustain to staccato 8 bars ago, you have to rewind 8 bars to go back to catch that key switch. And key switches don't translate into a score nicely. They're not real actual notes. So there's all sorts of little things. Plus you can layer key articulations together this way. So you will set all of these up. Make sure that you remember to use this multi-timbral setting. Get all the tracks set up. Once you have those set up, then like this will be your piccolo track. You have all of your woodwinds. They are set to bus 1. You have all of your brass. Those are set to bus 2. You have all of your strings, and those are set to bus 3. All of your strings are set to bus 3. Then you have a woodwinds master, a brass master, and a strings master. Notice that they accept bus 1, 2, and 3. they're going to come in so you have group control of all of your woodwinds, all of your brass, and all of your strings. Those are bus 1, 2, and 3 on your outputs. Bus 4 is the reverb. Bus 4 is on every single channel, including the masters. And bus 4 has a space designer on it, which has whatever reverb you want to set up with. There are EQs and compressors on every channel, but they're bypassed. They should also be flat, so they're ready to use when you're ready to use them. Let's see if I can drag this one over. So that's the basics of the setup. It's also going to have you do color coding of your tracks to make things organized in a bit more sense overall. So definitely recommended that you set up this template first before you get into the main composition, and that should give you some good direction into your composition. So week 3 assignments, we have a vertically layered composition mimicking an open world fantasy game called Palace of Erenthalion. You're also going to create your orchestral template using logic and contact. So that should give us everything. That's certainly enough from me chatting here. If you have any questions, so I'll stick around for a few. You can post those up in the chat. If you're watching this on the archive, send me a message if you have any questions. Other than that, have a good rest of your Tuesday, and I will see you again on Thursday. All right? Thanks a lot. Have a good evening.